Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of My JavaScript Story. This week we're talking to Charles Lowell. Charles, do you want to say hi?
Hello, everybody. Hey, Charles. I guess we're tocayos. I don't know if you're familiar with that term.
No, not really.
So I counted. I was actually in a wedding in Mexico, and there was another guy there who was Charles. I actually went by Carlos because he's from Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
But he was like, "Hey, somos tocayos. Like we have the same name." So there's actually a term for that. A special relationship that people share when they have the same name. It's like, "Hey, tocayo." So you can call me that, and I can call you that, and people think we're weird.
Sounds good to me. People already think I'm weird. This episode is sponsored by Sentry.io. Recently, I came across a great tool for tracking and monitoring problems in my apps. Then I asked them if they wanted to sponsor the show and allow me to share my experience with you. Sentry provides a terrific interface for keeping track of what's going on with my app. It also tracks releases so I can tell if what I deployed makes things better or worse. They give full stack traces and as much information as possible about the situation when the error occurred to help you track down the errors. Plus, one thing I love, you can customize the context provided by Sentry. So, if you're looking for specific information about the request, you can provide it. It automatically scrubs passwords and secure information, and you can customize the scrubbing as well. Finally, it has a user feedback system built in that you can use to get information from your users. Oh, and I also love that they support open source to the point where they actually open sourced Sentry if you want to self-host it. Use the code devchat at Sentry.io to get 2 months free on Sentry's small plan. That's code devchat at Sentry.io. Do you want to just give a brief introduction to who you are? We were chatting before the show. You run a consultancy called The Front Side.
Mm-hmm.
We had you on episode, I have it right in front of me here, and I don't have it right in front of me anymore. But you on React Roundup, we talked about state management library.
Yeah, we're talking about state management and microstates.
Yep. Mm-hmm. And I think we've had you on JavaScript Jabber as well, but for whatever reason, looked that one up. So anyway, we'll put links to those in the show notes. But yeah, do you want to just tell people what I missed as far as who you are?
Yeah. So my name's Charles Lowell. I've been, a developer for a really long time now. And I've worked in all kinds of languages, but I've been for the last 10 years or so running the front side, and what we specialize in is user interfaces and kind of the deep architecture behind stateful applications, stateful interfaces, because it turns out that there's a lot there.
Nice. And yeah, I did find those episode numbers. So JavaScript Jabber 337 and React Roundup 28.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we had Taras on both of those.
Yeah. So he's also at the front side, and yeah, we've been talking a lot about microstates lately because that's the kind of thing that we're infatuated with.
Yeah, well, it seems like 5-10 years ago, the framework space kind of heated up, and then React came out with a bunch of ideas that everybody else said, that's a really good idea, and went with them, so it heated up again. And now things are kind of settling on the framework front. People will go and try Vue or React or Angular and, figure out what they like. But they're all pretty stable, and it's the state management stuff now that people are going, oh, man. It's just such a pain or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's so much more to developing a stateful user interface than the Vue library.
Yeah.
And so there's so many pillars in this platform, all the way from the state management to how you build your assets and how you deploy to your servers.
Yeah. So yeah, it's interesting to kind of get, here are some trade-offs that we found and talk about some of those things that you're talking about. So that's not what this show's about, but if you want to get those conversations, we'll put links in the show notes. But yeah, let's get your story. It's always interesting to me too to get in and talk to somebody who's running a business, be it a consultancy or some kind of startup, and just what you work on and what your concerns are and how you end up there. So I'm going to take you way back though to when you got into programming.
Okay, boy, it was a long time ago.
That's what I tell people too.
Now, yeah, I think it's, it was a long time ago, but it was accidental. I happened to be, very, very lucky, I think, in terms of how I kind of stumbled into programming. And so I guess I didn't really have any particular idea to pursue a career in programming, but I just so happened that the time that I was 18 happened to coincide with the dot-com boom. So I was actually studying chemistry. My plan was to become like a chemist and do research, probably maybe stay in academia, maybe go into like pharmaceutical companies, do something like that. It's strange to actually think about that person because that's so far away from the career in which I ended up. But I was home from college one summer, and I think this was in 1995 or 1996. And a friend of mine's father was doing a startup, and it was like, hey, you know how to turn on a computer? You'll work for $8 an hour. Can you go, can you come do HTML for me? And I think that was when I say, I really stumbled in on it. I was lucky. I think there was a moment there where if you happen to be a particular age and, happen to have, know people who were doing startups, you were able to kind of ride that wave. And so, and as we all know, it crashed about 5 years later. But by that point, I was 5 years into a development career and had, I started with doing HTML, and then HTML ultimately turns into Perl at that time. It seems like you couldn't avoid it. So I was doing essentially server-based applications. They were still doing forms over HTML, but all in Perl. And so after I'd been doing that for a while, I decided, you know what, and incidentally, I dropped out of college to work on this startup. And and Bill
Gates, so it's fine.
Well, he ended up in a little bit better circumstances than I did. Maybe. But on the whole, I'm pretty happy with where I landed, so I can't complain. But I had been doing programming in HTML and Perl, and so I decided to actually go back to college, and at this point I got my degree in computer science. So I do actually have a computer science degree, but I only had one after I was developing for many, many years.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I love all the people. Do I need a CS degree? And you just turned that completely on its head.
Yeah. And like I said, I think, it just happened to work out that way. And so let's see. So after and interestingly enough, I ended up leaving college again before graduating. But then I came back and graduated. I did actually get a degree, but it wasn't until I was almost 30. So I went to work for a company called ThoughtWorks. And yep. I don't know if, some people have heard of it. Some of them didn't. I think this was in 2002 is when I went to work for ThoughtWorks. And again, I think I was very lucky in the sense that I landed there, because at ThoughtWorks, I learned not only how to develop code, I think I was kind of introduced to the professional love of my life, which is user interfaces. And so, at ThoughtWorks at that time, they had just hired Martin Fowler. They were very into the whole Agile thing. It was a very supportive environment for doing things like test-driven development. And so they were willing to create the space. If you said, I, as a developer, I'm going to try and do this project test first, and I have no idea how I'm going to do this. Your manager at ThoughtWorks would say, okay, but that's okay. We're going to create the space for you to do that, so that if it takes you 2 extra weeks to bang on this problem and do it test first, we're going to support you in that. And so I was able to learn these skills of doing test first, continuous integration, preferring shipping something and then iterating it over having the perfect design, and also understanding the business context around the software that you were developing, because it was a consultancy and ultimately they were trying to solve business problems. So I think I was actually very lucky in the sense that I got to go work there. And it was actually on this project. I was doing mostly back-end systems in Java, and it was on this project that I was put on a team to develop the user interface for a point of sale system. And it was a touchscreen. This is 2003, so it was before the iPhone and everything like that. But it was a touchscreen interface that clerks were going to be using at an electronics company to sell stuff. And I immediately fell in love with being able to create the part of the software that humans interact with. I just thought that was so magical, as opposed to software talking to other software. And I mean, that's interesting and it's critical, but for me, there was just something about writing the software that would be directly interfacing with people. And so that, you have certain moments in your career where you're like, wow, I want to do this for the rest of my life.
That's interesting. And it's, we've had a number of thought workers on the show, and I find it really interesting that, that they open things up and it's like, okay, these are the things that we've kind of adopted as core technologies or core practices. And then these are the things that we're experimenting with. And if somebody brings something else in, they're totally willing to try it to stay ahead of the curve. I think that is very forward thinking, and a lot of companies kind of get stuck where they are, and then it's, okay, how do we update this mainframe that we've had for 300 years?
Yeah, and they do a really great job of lowering the cost of experimentation so that you can keep abreast. I think that the radar that they put out is a great example of that. It's not just go out and adopt wildly anything, but be very studious and intentful about the technologies that you're tracking, the technologies that you're using, and the technologies that you're throwing away.
Yeah, we've had Neil Ford on to talk about the technology radar that they do with ThoughtWorks. And it's really interesting because, then they're actually having the conversations, not just about how do we do things, but where do we want to wind up? Yeah,
and so I think it's a great company. I know they've gotten both applause and criticism over the years, but I can definitely say that my experience there was extremely positive, and that the skills that I learned there have literally lasted me an entire career.
Nice. So how did you get into JavaScript then? I mean, I guess it's a natural move.
From Java into JavaScript?
No. I have that. So you have a show about JavaScript. Is that like Java?
You just add 5 letters. That's
right. No, but a natural move from user interface into JavaScript. But even then, I mean, it didn't
happen overnight though.
Well, yeah. And my career in programming started around 2004, 2005, 2006. Around then was when I was getting into web development. And JavaScript was kind of the redheaded stepchild that you dealt with because you had to.
Yeah. And
how do you get into that?
That was still my attitude, because at this point, that interface that I was developing was this Swing, which is the old Java toolkit library. So it was very fat client, and it was analogous to, I guess, what would be the equivalent. There was WX Windows, which was an open source C++ library. It was these heavy native widget based things. I guess the biggest analogy would be the native widget sets that you would use on Windows or Mac or GTK if you were doing that. So that was the kind of applications that I was working with. And so my actual journey to JavaScript was pretty circuitous, because I ended up leaving ThoughtWorks, traveling around for a couple of years on a motorcycle in South America. And it was actually, I had a little Linux laptop, and someone from ThoughtWorks met me in Cartagena and was like, dude, you've got to learn Ruby. It's this really cool language. It's everything that it solves all the problems that we ever hated about Java. And so I sat in this little hotel room in Cartagena with him, and over the course of like 2 or 3 weeks, learned Ruby. got my start on Ruby. Obviously, you don't learn a language over weeks, but that ignited a passion in me for Ruby. And
I'm curious who that was.
His name was Jeremy Stell Smith.
Okay.
He's a former thought worker. He was, if you ever heard of the Nordstrom lab, he was involved with that. Fantastic, absolutely fantastic guy. I learned a lot from him, just in terms of had such a go get 'em hustle attitude to development. He's, any project, he's just like, let's do it.
Yeah, and Ruby's where I got my start. So.
Yeah, so that introduced me into Ruby, and that was probably 2004 time frame. And so then that was my introduction to Ruby. And then when I got back to the States, I decided I was going to start working in Ruby. And so I was building out a toy application to help using Ruby on Rails, which is brand new at that point. This is like pre 1.0.
Nice.
I very distinctly remember, JavaScript for me was this, keep it at arm's length.
Right.
It's, it is, I didn't really consider it as it was something that you would throw up alert boxes for. You could do a little bit of DHTML. I had done some JavaScript, but why use JavaScript when you've got Swing, when you've got WX Windows, when you've got all these really powerful native widget sets? And I was using, to deploy this Ruby on Rails application, I was using a cloud management tool called Plesk, and which I don't even know if it exists anymore. It was kind of one of these control panels. And I still remember this moment. I was clicking on a link, and they used JavaScript to throw up a waiting dialog. And so it was such a simple interaction. And it was so clear to me as a developer that what they were doing was just styling a div. But I had this eureka moment where I realized, oh my goodness, divs can just be used for normal layout. I can write a dialog box, and fundamentally this thing is just a div, and there really is no difference between HTML and a native toolkit. And JavaScript is the glue that puts it together. And I think that, I certainly was not the first to have this aha moment. Obviously, the people who wrote this thing that caused the aha moment in me, it had occurred to them too. And it was such a simple thing. And all they did was use JavaScript to throw up a waiting dialog that then was there until the next link loaded. So they were listening to some page navigation event and throwing up the dialogue. But that was, it really kind of, there are these moments where the curtain is drawn back and you can see this world of possibility. And so, yeah. And so that was probably about in 2004. And so my journey with JavaScript began probably about a month or two after my journey with Ruby began. And so, and coming where I did as wanting to make user interfaces, I saw this as a possibility of, being able to unify the ease of deployment of web applications with these really rich stateful applications. And so I think that, over the years, so that was probably, about 15 years ago. And, I think just recently, like you said, in the last 5 years, I think the experience of trying to deliver good user experiences has now finally, JavaScript environments are up to par with where like the native clients were in 2003. I would say that inflection point for me was about 2014. But it was 10 years of chasing that. And so I did a lot of JavaScript stuff in the meantime.
Yeah, I was going to say, you must have been a weirdo because I didn't hear anybody talking about having a job as a front-end developer and liking it until 2012 maybe.
Yeah. Well,
and even then they couldn't find a job doing it full time. They had to be the whatever back-end developer and kind of sneak it in.
Yeah, well, I think it was because I had all this experience doing this stuff with native applications in Java and C++ that I was able to kind of make that connection. Or when other people made the connection, I was able to say, oh yeah, I get that. This is going to be big. And so, yeah, I think that, shortly after that, I founded Frontside. And it was actually originally founded as a company to build frameworks for doing front end development. It was founded in 2005. It wasn't really a consulting company until around 2009, 2010. But it was, we formed the company to sell a JavaScript framework that was, if I had to compare it to anything you would see today, I would say it was very close to Meteor. And we were trying to sell it commercially, but I think 2005 was about the last year that you could actually sell a framework commercially, because open source ate everything. So we really didn't. That landed flat and ended up chewing through all of my life savings. And so we ended up doing consulting and to kind of pay the bills. And it's a common tale, but that's what happened to us.
I'm really curious. So, first of all, how do you decide this is the right time to go ahead and build a framework? Because what was the time frame around there? What, 2010?
It was about 2000. No, 2010 is about when we started doing consulting. This is 2005. So we had been building an application as part of a startup, and that had Ruby on the back end, had Java on the back end, and we were doing a lot of heavy JavaScript. So we had implemented our own CSS parser so that we could actually style components and have them scoped. And so a lot of things that you see now that are just very commonplace is the kind of things that we were doing. We actually had, when I say it was similar to Meteor, we actually had the stateful server in Java that was actually running a Java interpreter that was, a JavaScript interpreter that was embedded into Java. So we were using the Rhino JavaScript engine, wow. And the front end could actually send JavaScript commands to the server, and it would interpret them as JavaScript. And so you could actually you would have these stateful widgets that were allocated on the server that had peers on the client. And so it was really just incredible, trippy stuff that we were able to do. And so we thought, well, man, this is such incredible capability. We ought to sell this stuff. And it was actually my experience developing and trying to sell our own framework that I was like, when Meteor came out, I was like, nope, not gonna do it. I've been there and tried to do that.
It's hard to compete with free.
So, but throughout that whole time, I think that time especially where we were running a lot of JavaScript on the server, we were running JavaScript in Java and JavaScript in Ruby too. Is when I really fell in love with JavaScript really hard, because I think I think one of the things that makes JavaScript so unique that people maybe don't realize or take for granted is when you think about it. And here we have this environment, right, where we're running JavaScript on the browser, running JavaScript on the client server, not like the main process is in Java and the main process is in Ruby, but these Ruby processes and Java processes are interpreting the JavaScript. Is that you have it's a language whose entire conception is to be able to run untrusted code. I think that's like something that maybe gets overlooked, that it's really the only environment where you have on your computer and you're just like, hey, just give me a bunch of code from randomly over the internet.
Yep.
Just give me everything. It's just run it from anywhere and I'll just give it to me and I'll execute it and it's going to be fine. It's not going to thrash the CPU. Well, it can, but I can put limits on it. I can control how much memory it's going to use, and I can control what resources it has access to, and it's totally secure. I mean, yeah, we've got some scripting attacks and everything like that, but by and large, it's going to be fine. And we were actually really taking advantage of that by having the client sending JavaScript to the server and the server sending JavaScript to the client, and they're all happily, exchanging JavaScript and running, and it was all fine. And so it's just, it really is, it was really fun to play with.
Yeah, I'll bet.
Hey guys, let me tell you about Clubhouse. I swear, I've used every project management software there is out there, and I hated project management software. Now I have Clubhouse. Overall, it's simple and straightforward to use, but has enough of the integrations and power features you need to get the job done without getting confusing. This means that I can use it, and the non-technical members of my team can figure out what they need from it. It also makes it easy for me to zoom out and see what's going on overall before zooming back in and specifying more work that needs to be done, or picking the next task for me to tackle. They integrate with all the systems that you'd expect and have a REST API for, well, the rest. If you go to https://clubhouse.io/JSstory, you can get 2 months free instead of the standard 14-day trial for any team size. Once again, that's https://clubhouse.io/JSstory.
So what was the transition like then from we're going to build this framework, we're going to put it out there, people are going to start using us and using it and paying us for it? How was that transition from product to consulting? Was it pretty natural, or were there bumps?
I think it was very natural, just because I think that I'm a much more natural consultant than I am a product person. So I am fundamentally a technologist, and the people at Frontside at that time were technologists. And you did see people marketing frameworks at that time. You don't really see that anymore now. But we just didn't even have the insight to know that this thing was going to drop off a cliff. And we didn't really care. And that's not having an understanding of your market, not really caring what the market will and will not bear, like that a good business does not make.
I can't argue with that.
Yeah, exactly. So it was very natural in the sense that we had all this technology and we had people willing to try it, but no one willing to buy it. So we didn't make a single sale. And so, we decided, hey, let's build something. Let's try and build something with this. When that didn't work out, we just, getting work for being a JavaScript expert and a Ruby expert there was a lot of work for that at that time.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think that was pretty close to the time when I went freelance. If you're talking around like 2010, 2011. And yeah, I mean, what's funny is as you talk about it was pretty natural and there was a lot of work. I went out I got laid off, and I convinced my wife that I wanted to go freelance, and of course she freaked out, right? How we're going to pay the bills. And it turned out that, yeah, there was plenty of work, and it was a really natural transition just because, yeah, it's pretty straightforward. I write code, you pay me, I pay my bills. And as long as that equation kind of balances, then you're mostly okay, and you can get away with fudging on a lot of things to get there as long as you keep your clients happy. Yeah.
And so, I mean, so it made a lot of sense for us, and that was what we were good at. We understood the technology market. We were able to perceive trends, long-term trends, about what was going to be a healthy technology and what wasn't. And, we had developed pretty good taste, over this time period. And we always had our fundamentals. And so we just decided to focus the business around that.
I'm curious how you do that, because we talked about Brandon Hayes a little bit before. He worked at Frontside, and he seemed fairly involved in more than just writing the code. More involved.
Oh, absolutely.
Stuff. But how do you make those decisions? Because I remember that he was way into Ember for a long time, and that turned out not to be the major market winner. I mean, there's plenty of work out there for it, but
I mean, it depends on what you see as the major market winner. And I think that's one of the pieces of value that we can provide, or that we provide, is I still, to this day, if you are a startup, if you're working by yourself, I would probably recommend Ember as your best bet. If you're one or two developers who are trying to actually start a business, and it's not a technology business, I would recommend Ember as the go-to. In fact, we did an Ember project just last year. That was we wrapped up an Ember project at the end of last year, and we kind of looked at the options, and we looked at the development team, and we said, you've got 6 weeks to deliver this huge piece of functionality, and every other concern is pretty secondary. You've got to get to market.
Right.
And I still think that Ember actually, if you have an experienced Ember team, or you've got people who are not front-end developers, that Ember is absolutely your best bet. And so, but we also, obviously, I would say the last couple of years has been dominated by doing React work, just because that's a technology that a lot of teams have chosen for whatever reason. And just being able to understand the kind of overarching business context and look past, is there a popularity contest among JavaScript developers? Because as important as, being a JavaScript developer, we are very, very important, but our preferences and our tastes are not necessarily the most pressing business concern for a startup that's trying to make it, or, a business that's trying to accomplish some goal.
That's totally true. I think a lot of people just go with what they know.
Mm-hmm.
And, until you wind up with a React or a Vue or whatever. And that's not a bad way to make the decision, but it's definitely an interesting dynamic there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's, again, not to get into framework preferences, because I think, at this point we like to work with most of them. We actually haven't done much Vue work. But I am curious to get into that.
Yeah, I'm getting into Vue myself, actually. That's the one that I've kind of been going after. And, a lot of it has to do with who I'm talking to. But, yeah, it's funny because React still has a larger market share. And, I haven't taken the time to learn it. So.
Yeah. I think you haven't taken the time to learn which? Vue? React. The thing is a lot of it is, again, comparing apples to oranges. I think you look at something like Angular and you compare it to React, and it really is, I don't think it's a valid comparison, because frameworks like Angular, like Ember, and I think, more and more this is true about Vue, is that they're really trying to be a platform, not so much a framework. So the concerns that they're trying to solve the problems that you're going to have as a UI developer developing stateful JavaScript applications, from your command line tools to your editor integration to internationalization to continuous integration and delivery to,
That's totally fair.
To state management. And so, I think,
I think you're right, especially as you look at some of these things like Angular going into native script, or React Native, or Vue now runs on native script. They manage a certain layer of things, but it doesn't even have to be web anymore.
Right.
It is a platform.
Right. It's a platform, and the Vue layer is one absolutely critical pillar of that platform.
Yeah.
But it is one pillar, and there are a lot of pillars, because if you think about the things that you do as a developer to actually ship an application, writing Vue code is, I hope, a very small fraction of it. And I mean Vue as in the actual, what it looks like.
Right.
So I think that, Ryan Florence wrote this, probably one of my favorite blog posts, that's, you can't not have a framework. Everyone who hasn't read it, I'm sure everybody already has read it, but you should go read it. The same applies for a platform. You can't not have a platform. And so you need to think about what the platform that you have is accomplishing for you. And first understanding what it is, because whether you're using React or you're using Angular or you're using Vue, you have a platform that is encompassing of that framework or that library. And so it definitely pays to think about that too.
Yeah. I love Ryan. He is definitely one of those interesting people out there in the community. Done a lot in React, done a lot in Ember. But yeah,
Yep.
I remember I was at it was a JavaScript conference, and wound up going to lunch with the same group that he did, and he had just gotten into React. And I remember it was funny because he was just raving about React, and I'm like, I thought you were way into Ember. And he looks at me and with just deadpan, Ember's crap. And I'm like, oh, come on. I'm like, really? I'm like, you used to rant and rave about how often no, Ember's crap. and I'm like, okay, but what about some of the other ones? What about Angular's crap? And yeah, and he's done a ton of stuff in React. So yeah, anyway, it's just funny because everybody has these opinions, and it really does boil down to, what you want your platform to feel like and look like and run like.
Yeah, and a lot of them are very, very different stylistically. I mean, I would say stylistically, especially later, in my career, especially as I've really gotten into functional programming, because I think that's something, to bring the conversation back to JavaScript is, it's something that I think is JavaScript enables, like a pretty, I consider, awesome form of functional programming. I think you can, it is definitely, it's definitely possible, and I think fun to do it that way. And I think that the React taste as a community is more geared towards that. But that said, so in terms of the microstructure of the code, I find my personal preference more aligned with the React community, but in terms of the macroscopic structure of the code, I find myself more aligned with an Angular or a Vue. So I think there's a lot of room for nuance in there, because I don't think that I think that React code bases on the macroscopic level tend towards being fractured, having a lot of different patterns, and using a lot of different technologies. So it's I think, as a developer, there's room enough to contain worlds of opinions that sometimes are not necessarily in alignment with each other.
Well, the other thing that I find interesting is that a lot of people make these decisions, am I going to use Ember or React or Angular or Vue or something else? And the only way that you're going to 100% know that is the best decision for your application is to build your application in all of them and then know which one is the best one. And that's just not practical. It doesn't make any sense. And so you kind of have to make these judgment calls. So even if you build a smallish app in each of them, or, do some level of something with them, ultimately there's just no way. So what you wind up doing is you wind up, doing some kind of audition for the ones that you're interested in using, and then hoping you pick the best one. And then as you build out your application, eventually the complexity is going to run up against the boundaries of what your platform is good at. And so then when you wind up working around enough issues, then you decide whether or not it's the best choice for the next application you have to build. And I just don't know if you do any better than that.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a problem that we've been confronting, over the last couple of years, as you say, as the platform wars kind of settle down. And one of the things that we try and do as a company that works, on multiple platforms, we're constantly switching the platform which we're working on and switching that context, and really is trying to deepen the integration with just the vanilla environment. So how much of your application can you write in vanilla JavaScript? How much of your application can you use that just uses regular classes instead of, MobX objects or Ember objects, or uses the Vue reactivity system or the Angular reactivity system? How can you express your application both in terms of its state and, how it manages its effects? Can you do that outside of the platform, so that it's portable from one platform to the other? Because ideally, right, if you've got a good platform, you should be able to set new stuff on top of it, regardless of what that is.
Now you sound like Christopher and Andy from JavaScript Jabber.
Oh yeah.
He advocates a lot of vanilla JS stuff.
Well, I think it's incredible what you can accomplish with vanilla JS.
Yeah.
But I do think that the integration into your platform does have to be convenient. Like it's not, I remember when Redux, for example, came out. A good friend of mine, Torrin Billups, maintained the bindings for Ember Redux, and I think that despite all the good work that he did, it didn't really get a huge amount of adoption inside of the Ember community, just because it didn't feel idiomatic. And so it can be a lot of work to really narrow down an abstraction so that it can be projected into a different framework or platform and still feel like that platform. I think it can be done, but it requires you have to hone it and tune it. And sometimes you'll be like, oh, this thing that it does, that's really only geared so that it can solve this use case. So we need to whittle it down a little more, and hopefully you can whittle it into something useful and not whittle it away till there's nothing there.
Right.
But that's a lot of the work that we're trying to do with microstates, and so that you can have state management that will work anywhere. And right now I'm working on a structured concurrency library, so that you can manage the concurrent effects inside your application without having to have a specific framework integration.
Right. Interesting.
But it means it takes a long time, and you have to really dig down and solve these things at a fundamental level.
Yeah, absolutely. You want it to feel like it belongs with everything else in your application.
Exactly.
So I'm curious, when you've kind of segued into the next segment, what are you working on these days?
So what are we working on?
Besides moving. I hear you're moving.
Yeah, I'm going to be moving. I spent a considerable amount of 2018 and a considerable amount of 2019 will be moving, first to New Mexico and then back. But what I'm personally working on is the microstates state management library. And what that is a library to in the context of user interface and processes, it's really a way to very efficiently model state machines so that you can immutably transition your state from one point to another and have them be, above all, composable. So if it's very similar, I would say, in paradigm to Redux at the macro level, in the sense that you have essentially one value that is being rolled forward over time. However, where it differs is that instead of it being one monolithic value, you can you have one monolithic value and one monolithic reducer function. And I use this analogy just because I think when it comes to immutable architecture, what most people understand is the Redux architecture. Being able to compose that into essentially very small pieces of state that are attached to their reducers. And so that's how it started, but then you realize what you're essentially expressing is the concept of type. So if I have let's say if I'm in a Redux store, I have a string, there are only a certain number of reducers that are valid for that string, right? They are the string operations, the string algebra, if you will. And so, a string can concat, a string can be split, a string can do all these things. And so rather than just throw that away and say, we're only going to see if this is a string action and then run the string reducer, we just say, hey, this data is typed. And so it has a set of implicit operations. And so I can compose that data and compose that as operations to build bigger and bigger atoms of state. And so I know I maybe used a little bit of jargon, but if you can think of it as a composable, reusable Redux. And so then there's that. And so if you have that, you should be able to use that pretty much anywhere. And so then we're using that to be able to express state machines, and then we're also using that to try and develop a structured concurrency library that you should be able to use anywhere.
That sounds cool.
Yeah.
We discussed a lot of this on React Roundup and JavaScript Jabber. So if you want a more in-depth, or you're sitting there and going, I don't know if I completely understand, go listen to that, because I think it's explained a little better there.
Yeah, yeah. But the idea is that, to try and extract the concept of state management and give the best solution, that we can certainly find, that's the most portable, that it uses nothing but kind of simple JavaScript classes and things like that. The other thing that I'm working on is a structured concurrency library, which I just started a couple weeks ago, but I'm really, really excited about the whole concept. I don't if anybody's read the blog on the Trio library from Python. It's very illuminating. I had a leg up just having worked in Ember and worked with the Ember concurrency library. It was written by Alex Matchner, who is just an incredible developer, incredibly bright guy, and a wonderful fellow. He developed this concurrency library for Ember, which I think really is a gold standard for any concurrency library that you care to work with. But the whole concept is so mind-blowing and yet so obvious once you see it, that I would recommend it. I would recommend everybody to read up as much as they can on structured concurrency, because it solves so many of the problems that you have that you didn't know you had.
Makes sense.
So I could, yeah. So the blog on Trio, it's on Vorpus. I think it's vorpus.com or something like that. It's by the author of the Trio library. I think it said "Go to considered harmful" is the name of the post, and it just does a great job of explaining why structured concurrency is a solution to a problem that keeps coming up, and how you can relate it to problems that you've had in the past. Alex's initial introduction to Ember concurrency is a similar thing. It's all of the example code is in Ember, so you might have to do a little bit of translation, but it also is a really great job of explaining the symptoms of like, oh, I'm feeling this pain, right? You've got this, you're getting whacked over the head by these bugs, and you don't even understand the root cause, and he comes and just shines a light right on it. So that's really exciting, and I think it's something that it's something that we think about in all of our applications these days, is how do we structure our side effects? And it's something that, I hope that we can bring to more people. I think another thing that I'm working on is a little bit more humble, but it's in terms of the scope of the JavaScript library, but it's just one of the most fun that I've had, fun times I've had working with, and we use it in microstates. And we actually use it in inside the side effects library too, is a generation JS, which is just a little library to compose JavaScript iterators. So I think that when I found JavaScript iterator, I think it's one of the most unsung APIs that we have, because it touches on all of the collection classes. It's the same API that's presented by generator functions. And this is a little library to help you just wrap any iterable, anything that has the symbol.iterator interface, and you can map it, and you can reduce it, and you can filter it, and you can do all of your fun array and map and collection and APIs, except it's lazy, it's and it's universal. So that's probably some of the most fun I've had writing JavaScript in a while.
Nice.
And so now I never work with iterators without it.
Cool. Well, how do people find you online? On what
You
you're
can,
working on.
yeah. So you can on GitHub, on Twitter, on Cowboy D. It's short for Cowboy Dan. It's a nickname I got at the University of Michigan. I think just because I was from Texas. And so, but I got it when I got my first email address, and it stuck with me for the rest of my life. So, Cowboy Dan on Twitter and GitHub, and I think frontside.io/about/Charles-Lowell.
Awesome. All right. Well, I'm going to push us over to picks. Do you have some things you want to shout out about on the show?
Sure. I thought about this, and I think certainly using recency bias as the biggest factor, I would say would have to be Musician. I am having so much fun with that app. If you haven't heard about it, it's an app for Android and iOS, and it's like Guitar Hero, except in real life, but on steroids and helping you actually learn music. So it has 5 different modes. It's got guitar, it's got bass, it's got ukulele, it's got piano. It even has a voice component, and you can play along and practice with the ukulele tablatures. I'm using I'm doing the uke mode, and it's just absolutely brilliant, because my favorite thing is it has a practice mode where you can hone in on a very small window of the music. So you can say highlight 2 measures, and if you've got a particularly hard lick or a hard sequence of notes, you can just focus it on those 2 measures. You can slow it way down, and you can set the parameters and say, hey, if I get over 95% of the notes right, I want you to increase the speed by 5%. And so you can it's just got the ability to burn in muscle memory. And so I've been playing ukulele for 15 years, but in terms of the fine motor skills, this practice mode has helped me burn in the chords and burn in the note transitions, so that I feel so much more comfortable using my pinky finger than I ever have, doing stretches and things like that. It's just, the workout mode is just phenomenal. So if you ever thought about picking up an instrument, you should definitely check this out, because they've got like 15 levels, and level 1 is very, very easy and basic, and you can just iterate on there, and you can very quickly go up to your level of ability, and and iterate and work very hard. So it's just got a great training, and I absolutely love it.
I have a ukulele. I've always wanted to learn how to play. This sounds awesome.
Yeah, go get it. And they have a free mode. They let you practice for 10 minutes a day. And so if you want to practice for more than 10 minutes a day, and this is kind of the brilliant part too, is they have pop songs. And so they have tablatures that they've transcribed for pop songs. So you can learn. Yeah. So, you can learn from using popular music if you get their paid subscription. So it's a great app. It's a great freemium model. And from my perspective, worth every penny. And you can do a 2-week trial to see if you want it. So if you want to learn the uke, or you want to learn the bass, or you want to learn piano, go for it.
Nice. I'm going to jump in here with a few picks. One is, so every year around my wife's birthday, we go down to St. George, Utah, which is a whole lot closer to where you're at, by the way. And we go through the parade of homes, which is just the home builders, open up homes that they've built, some of the custom homes that they've done. And, you can go through and see what they've done. And, of course, we complain about all the decisions they made that, aren't quite our taste. But it's a ton of fun. And so I'm going to go ahead and just shout out about that. I don't know if they do those everywhere or just here. I mean, they have one here in Utah Valley. They have one in Salt Lake County, so you can go see houses that are built up there, or, around here as well. But that's just been a ton of fun. And the other one that I'm going to shout out about, and this is one that I've used when I traveled a bit. I usually wind up using it when I travel to Las Vegas, just because I can drive down in my car, and then I have a vehicle to get around in. And I've been using VRBO for that. I actually got a deal. I'm going down to a conference at the end of March in Las Vegas, and not that it would have mattered, I guess, a whole lot. But I got a hotel room. It's actually a vacation rental condo that's part of the MGM Grand campus, and I wound up getting that for like $70 a night, which is considerably less than staying in the conference hotel, and it's within walking distance of the Tropicana where the conference is. So,
that was on VRBO.
Yeah.
That's actually what we used to book when we went to Angel Fire to go skiing this Christmas.
Oh, nice.
And that's where we found our accommodations.
Yeah, I think we did that. We did the family reunion last summer down by Zion National Park, and we just got a giant house, and everybody came and stayed, and it was a ton of fun there too. So, yeah, great option. I've liked Airbnb less and less, looking that kind of thing. So I've wound up in some pretty sketchy places out of Airbnb. What?
Aren't they? Oh wait, no. I think VRBO is owned by HomeAway, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So anyway, well, thanks for coming, Charles, and talking to me. I know we went a little over, but I appreciate you coming and sharing your experience with us.
Hey, no problem. Thank you, Charles.
All right. Well, we'll go ahead and wrap this one up, folks, and we will be back next week.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.